Morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from around the globe. I'm Brian Landis, President of the Society of Plastics Engineers, or SPE as we like to call ourselves. Welcome to the first ever virtual ANTEC, our annual international conference. Obviously, I would have preferred to meet with you in person, but prudence is called for in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. So, I welcome you to ANTEC and to my home. I'm so glad you tuned in today. From the time as a university student until today, I've been involved with SPE for nearly 40 years. In that time, I can honestly say that I have never live streamed anything, let alone invited a large international group of people to watch it. Yet, here we are. I feel a bit like Mr. Rogers, inviting you behind the curtain of my life and behind the scenes of SPE and all that plastics industry has to offer. So, hosting the launch of ANTEC from my home is quite possibly the best introduction of a community that has meant and continues to mean so much to me. If I were to describe SPE, 5 different words come to mind. Obviously, plastics. And 2, we are professionals dedicated to teaching, learning, mentoring, and sharing. We are passionate about the work we do and the impact it has on both society and our planet. SPE is personal. ANTEC is our annual opportunity to gather, encourage, challenge, and spend time with one another. We know that our work and our relationships impact our communities. These communities are our industries, our companies, and the towns where we live. We are so passionate about the value of networking that we were not willing to cancel the ANTEC experience. Instead, we transformed the conference to a virtual offering that brings many more students and professionals in touch with this community. And finally, we are purposeful. And you will see that throughout the conference. For those joining the open session today, you may not know that we have fully transitioned a 1-week multi-track face-to-face conference into a multi-week virtual development opportunity. This enables you to participate in all of the content that ANTEC offers. So let me take a moment to introduce you to SPE and to our purpose. We are an international professional society with approximately 23,000 individual members in 84 countries. We are unique. We span the entire plastics value chain, all the way from discovery to the brand owner. We represent all industry functions, including R&D, business, manufacturing, and corporate. We bridge industry, academia, nonprofits, government, NGOs, and local communities. Our purpose and passion are to promote knowledge generation, create opportunities for networking, and ultimately catalyze innovations that make a positive difference for the entire plastics community and society as a whole. So as I tee up ANTEC 2020, you are seeing SPE's purpose and passion in action. Today, our world is fighting a pandemic that few have experienced in their lifetime. As a result, the world's mode of daily networking looks very different than it did a few short months ago. That's why ANTEC looks so different than originally planned. In the midst of isolation, work from home, school from home, we redesigned ANTEC to meet professionals and students where they are. In the coming weeks, we will be using technology to assist in building new and refreshed ways to connect us both personally and professionally. Members will have access to knowledge, resources, and networking opportunities that keep them at the forefront of product, process, and value chain innovation. If you haven't yet registered for ANTEC 2020, please consider it. In addition to learning and professional development, we have a lot of social activities built into the program to keep your experience personal, interactive, and actually very fun. A mere 12 months ago, I had the privilege of kicking off ANTEC 2019 in Detroit with the theme Aspire. At ANTEC 2020, we continue to step forward. On display during the conference are the many things that our industry aspires to. Innovations that forward our understanding and ability to meet societal needs while preserving the planet. Problem solving aimed at tackling the challenges of food and clean water distribution, energy conservation, sanitary supplies, and safety for our health professionals, all while striving to make a lower carbon future possible. And positive impact, causing us to rise and come through when people need us most, through things like accelerating equipment design and manufacturing. We see some examples today in medical applications. The transitioning of manufacturing facilities from core product lines to much needed supplies and equipment, which are in limited supply. And sharing trusted scientific knowledge and know-how that elevates everyday practices. A wonderful example is our SPE in Action online community, the battle against COVID-19. Here we invite everyone to get involved by expressing where they can, what they have extra, where they need help, where they can provide help, or share what they've heard and learned. Last year, the issue that was top of mind was different, and our efforts to address plastic in the environment continue. The challenge we are facing today and those that come tomorrow will be different. However, our resolve to do our part in meeting those challenges will remain the same. So I am kicking off our experience with the quote I used last year, which was pulled from the Alliance to End Plastic Waste video. It remains our rallying cry today. And I quote, "Innovators will help preserve our world for generations to come. Because when we bring together the heroes of today to dream, to build, and to help our cities, our communities, and our neighborhoods improve, we can do something truly incredible." And speaking of incredible, we are joined today by two CEOs from innovative companies as our keynote speakers, Jim Fitterling of Dow and Tom Salmon of Berry Global. Leading innovators like Dow and Berry Global are exactly what we need as a society faces the uncertainty of viruses, a volatile global economy, and climate change. Collaboration and innovations are required to deliver solutions that make a positive difference today and for a future that's even better. For our keynote session this morning, both Jim and Tom will each offer a perspective on the plastic industry. After these presentations, there will be a moderated question and answer session led by Don Lope, Editorial Director of Plastics News. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Jim Fitterling, CEO of Dow. Jim was named Chief Executive Officer-elect of Dow in March 2018. Prior to becoming CEO in July 2018. Before that, he served as Dow's President and Chief Operating Officer. From September 2017 through March 2019, Jim also served as Chief Operating Officer for the Material Science Division of Dow DuPont. an $86 billion holding company comprised of the Dow Chemical Company and DuPont, created with the intent to form independent, publicly traded companies in material science, agriculture, and specialty product sectors. During his 36-year career at Dow, Jim has held a wide range of leadership positions in many of the company's business units, in corporate development, and in business operations. In addition, he served as the business lead in Dow's successful launch of its next generation sustainability goals. At his direction, in January 2019, Dow became a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, an initiative to accelerate efforts to drive innovation, provide much needed resources, and take decisive action to put an end to plastic waste in the environment. Jim joined Dow in 1984, 2 weeks after earning his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Welcome, Jim. The camera is yours.
Hi, welcome, Brian. Thank you for having me. And on behalf of everybody at Dow, I'd just like to say welcome to all the SPE members who have joined, and welcome you to this conference. So I realize this isn't how we intended to get together, but I do applaud the SPE for coming up with an alternative way to keep us all in touch. And I think that's exactly what we need to do during this time of COVID-19. This is a great example of the kind of perseverance we're all going to need in the months and weeks ahead as we tackle this virus and this rolling pandemic that's going through the world. And so I would just tip my hat to SPE, and Brian, like you, I've set new world records in terms of live streaming and webcasting and everything else over these past 2 weeks. So originally, Brian had asked me to speak to you about the state of the industry, but I don't think at that time that we thought we were going to be in the state that we're in today. So I thought maybe I would shift a little bit and talk about what I think we can do collectively to keep moving forward and what we should be doing to keep moving forward, because the economy is going to continue to adjust and to need us to help show the way forward for the world as we work through this pandemic and come out of it. And I want to start with a conversation that somebody related to me who works from outside our industry, and they were looking at obviously the stock market reaction to everything that's been going on. And they said, wow, it must be a horrible time to be in the petrochemical industry. And it caused me to take pause for just a second and say, you know, my perspective on this is just the opposite. I don't know of a better time or a more important time to be in our industry than the one that we've got in front of us right now. And I'll tell you why. When I joined Dow in 1984, you know, I've never in my career seen a time when our industry was more necessary and indispensable in the fight that we have on display today. The companies that we represent in the industry and that we do business with are collectively and without exception the one strong critical pillar of the economy. And for once, at least in the recent history, being in the chemicals or plastics business is not a bad name. People are starting to realize that one of the reasons these products are so sustainable is because of all the work that's been done, and health and hygiene and sanitation are one of the often overlooked benefits of using plastic materials. We supply the world with products that the world needs to live, not only to live, but to live well. And our contributions, especially in this environment, are gaining new appreciation because of our ability to create and deliver the products that the world desperately needs. The issues that we're facing today are going to be temporary. They will change. But what hasn't changed is the invaluable nature of our work. And I'm proud to be part of a company and an industry that plays such a critical role in everybody's lives. Now, what's it going to look like going forward? What can we do together as an industry, and what can keep us moving forward? So there are a few things that we can't afford to lose sight of, even while this short-term picture is in front of us. And the first one, and one that I would implore all of you to do in your companies, is we have to practice the things that are the basic fundamentals of running our companies. We've got to keep our plants and our operations and our people healthy and safe. All of us are prone to distractions during a normal course of events, but especially at times like this, it's easy to get distracted, and that's understandable. But we can't forget the contract that we have with our communities to run our plants safely and to protect our workers. And now is the perfect time for everybody to double down on that obligation, ensure that the health and safety of our employees and our communities is at the very top of the priority list. Second, we cannot forget that one of the industry's hallmarks, and Brian mentioned it, one that makes us so very unique, is our ability to deliver innovations that people around the world need. Every crisis has some element of opportunity in it, and this is our opportunity to deliver the innovations that meet some of the world's greatest challenges. And finally, I think to that last point, I want to encourage everybody to continue to move forward on our commitments to sustainability. It would be easy during COVID-19, and I've heard this on news reports and on different shows that have been on the television. People are saying, well, you know, this COVID crisis is going to cause all the sustainability activities to move to one side. I think the COVID-19 virus is going to be a temporary setback that is with us for this year, and we'll work through finding therapeutics and vaccines and treatments to that. But the air we breathe, the water we use, and the land we live on is here forever with us. And we can't afford to lose the momentum that we've started to gain already to safeguard the environment and help us move to a more circular economy. And one of the topics that I'd originally planned to discuss at the live SPE ANTEC was the groundbreaking work we're doing to reduce plastic waste from the environment, especially from our waters. Many of you represent companies that are members of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. We have over 50 member companies now. And so you know that the efforts that are underway around the world to inject new thinking, new partners, and more collaboration are starting to bear fruit to tackle this global challenge. We've got everyone from producers to consumers, to NGOs to governments working together to play a part to solve this problem. And even as we work through this temporary economic environment, we can't afford to step away from commitments that we've made like this. So I would encourage you to continue to join us in our efforts to reduce plastic waste. And I would also encourage you to be a voice of reason in engaging with our communities and other stakeholders. Help them to understand the science-based need for solutions that we bring to the world. Help them recognize both the tremendous value that plastics bring to society, but also the significant value that plastic waste in a circular economy can bring, and help them to see the big picture for all of us and see the positive steps that we're already beginning to take. So like Brian, let me welcome you and bring it back to where I started. Thanks for your adaptability and your perseverance, and for your resolve to step up and address the critical issues that we're facing. Contrary to what some believe, it's never been a better time to be in the industry. Our products are critical to keep the world moving forward, and our innovations are critical to tackle the immense environmental and social challenges ahead. I'm proud to be part of the industry, and I'm proud that you're part of it too. And I know that together, our companies and our organizations can continue to provide the world with vital products and innovations that it desperately needs. So thank you for joining the conference today, and thank you for being part of this indispensable industry. And last, Brian, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for 40 years in the industry and for all the contributions you made it now.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you personally, and thank you for that perspective, that hopeful perspective, and how important our industry will be to solve the challenges of today and tomorrow. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Tom Salmon, CEO Berry Global. Tom was named Chief Executive Officer of Berry Global Group, Incorporated, and appointed to the company's board of directors in February 2017. Tom's most recently served as the company's president and chief operating officer. From November 2015 until October 2016, Tom was president of Berry's Consumer Packaging Division. He previously served as president of Berry's Rigid Closed-Top Division since November 2014 and president of Berry's Engineered Materials Division from 2003 until November 2014. Tom was general manager for Honeywell Plastics for the 2 years prior thereto. He was the global sales director for Allied Signal's engineering plastics and films business from 1999 to 2001. Prior to joining Honeywell, Allied Signal, Tom held several positions at GE Plastics and GE Lighting, divisions within General Electric. Tom holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from St. Bonaventure University in Western New York. Welcome, Tom. The camera is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone joining today. As you've heard clearly, we were all hoping that we would be in San Antonio doing this meeting live, but when I had the opportunity to meet and take on and accept this invitation, I welcomed it because clearly I have a small story to share with you. You're all incredibly talented engineers where we've got such a large group assembled around the world. And if it wasn't for people like you, it would be very difficult for people like me to have achieved, the position I'm currently in. And as Brian had mentioned, back in when I started my career, I started with GE's lighting business, and I was clearly selling light bulbs out of a minivan and wiring devices to grocery stores throughout Western New York. And at that time, I received a phone call. The phone call was from GE Plastics at a time when there was not very often opportunities to go cross-divisionally. And it was from a manager in that group saying, we'd like you to take a look at our division. And I did. And through the series of interviews, the last interviewee or interviewer, I guess, sat with me and said, Tom, I just don't quite understand it. He said, Boy Scouts sell light bulbs. And I replied, well, who do you think sells them to the Boy Scouts? And from there, it ultimately began my career in the plastics industry, which I was absolutely blessed. But what I realized when I started with GE, I was one of the rare few that did not have a mechanical engineering degree, a chemical engineering degree. And, as I went through my training, I realized that I needed to find a way to create value. And what I realized was the value was created by men and women like you that are associated on this phone. The engineers that are supporting material science and product development and design. That was what I needed to have associated with me to create value. So this was an opportunity for me to simply say to you all, thank you. Thank you for what you've done for me. Thank you what you've done for our industry, bringing it to where it is today. And, as my friend Jim had mentioned, I think these are incredibly exciting times for us to be part of this industry. Many of you know the backgrounds of Berry. We are a very large packaging protective solutions supplier serving 6 continents around the world. And when we say diversified, the fact that we're making everything from duct tape to trash bags to shrink film to stretch film to films and rigid plastics that are ultimately protecting your food, as well as so essential products right now, like the material for the N95 masks, for disinfectant wipes, and the likes, that are truly helping to shape and keep our world safe. It reminds me of just how indispensable what we do inside this industry around plastics, we really are. And these are incredibly exciting times, but there really seems to be a common theme right now. And, before I stepped on this meeting this morning, I was with my staff and we were on our weekly sustainability call, capturing in the different actions and activities around the world. So that has not stopped. That's not stopped. And as Jim said, it won't stop. We're going to continue to find ways to bring value. But what the marketplace is desiring right now, and it's a common theme for our companies, is around environment, it's around health, and it's around how we can keep our foods fresh and safe during this time of COVID-19. And literally what has changed our world over the last 90 days or so. And you all have been an incredible component of that value. And it's really demonstrating that there's no other substrate on the planet with the diverse attributes that plastics has to serve as many industries as it does, to bring real value and to change people's lives. I want to focus really on 3 areas before I close these opening comments. First is, as you heard Jim mention, right now, our single priority is to keep our employees safe. And as a company, outside of the coronavirus, it's our #1 objective as a corporation. It's always safety. Every single employee has the opportunity to shut down a piece of equipment if they don't feel it's an environment that's safe for them. But our mission as a company, which I think this applies to our industry, is always advancing to protect what's important. So never has there been a time when the two have been so commingled as they are right now. Literally, I have to keep our people safe, going to the plant, producing the products that people need for survival and for their health in order to fulfill our mission. So it's really caused us, and I think that application applies to our industry to a very large extent. And again, reinforces why this is such a dynamic time to be inside the plastics world. The second thing is this virus. It has clearly changed our world. I'm amazed our teams are working remotely. We're conducting and transacting business as we did before. We're focused on service, delivery, safety, to make certain that we continue to supply an uninterrupted supply of those materials that people need. But our products around this industry and across this industry are literally saving lives. And in contrast to some of the themes and negative narratives that are being presented around plastics, this is an incredible time to re-educate the world around the power of plastics and what it can truly do during an environment as unique to the world as it is right now. To that end, I'd also say, as Jim had mentioned, I was very fortunate, and Barry was fortunate to be, a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastics Waste. And I'll never forget, I had an opportunity in a conference similar to this at World Petrochemical to talk about why this is such a great time to be a convert in the plastics industry. And at that meeting, I chose to actually take a different slant, which was, we need to do a better job defending who we are as an industry and address some of the real issues that we have, which is plastic waste. So when the Alliance ultimately was formed, Barry clearly jumped and said, we have got to be part of this, because there will be no better way to ultimately solve the problem but by having ultimately a cross-functional group of companies represented, that we could address every component of the value chain to address plastics waste. And I think, the 4 primary objectives that the Alliance had set out was, we need to do a better job in educating. We need to find ways to continue to innovate around the problem. We need to build the infrastructure, and we have to support cleanup. And for me, clearly, I felt the organization was focused on the right thing at the right time to address this problem. And as Jim said, we have made real good progress. We'll continue to communicate, as this organization grows and proliferates, and be able to share with the world the progress of business models that can help solve the problem of our primary objective around ending plastic waste. As we've all said, this is a tremendous time to be in this industry. You have got a low-cost substrate with the most versatile mechanics of any other raw material on the planet that has enabled our world to be what it is today. I will share that the collaboration that I have seen during this period has been really refreshing. And if you think about it, the groups represented on this call, are the ones capable of helping solve this problem. Chemistry's represented, conversions represented, designs represented. And this group's ability to ultimately collaborate and coordinate action effectively has done historically an incredible job in shaping this industry, but will do an incredible job shaping this industry and our world for many years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the valuable insight into how our industry can be the leading innovators to solve societal challenges and things that benefit our planet. That now brings us to our moderated discussion, which will be led by Don Lope, Editorial Director of Plastics News. Don was named Plastics News Editor in April 2011. He was promoted to Editorial Director, adding responsibilities for Plastics News Europe, Plastics and Rubber World, Rubber and Plastics Journal in 2017 and 2019. He earned a journalism degree from Northwestern University in 1983. Don then worked as a reporter for 2 years for the Milwaukee Journal in Wisconsin and for 6 years at the Daily Press and Times Herald daily newspapers in Newport News, Virginia. Before joining Plastics News as a staff reporter in 1991, he was promoted to news editor in mid-1993 and became managing editor 2 years later. Thank you, Don, for joining us and facilitating what I am sure will be an interesting question and answer session. Panel, the camera is now yours.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'd like to thank Brian. I'd like to thank Pat Fari and SPE for putting on, I think, something that's going to be a very exciting presentation today. I really enjoyed hearing both from Jim and from Tom. And let's go right to the questions. I wanted to start with Jim. So Jim, you mentioned in your remarks the importance in times like these of maintaining focus on safe operations and a commitment to communities. Can you share with us what Dow is doing to adjust to the current environment and to ensure that that focus is maintained?
Yeah, thank you, Don. Well, first and foremost, we had the experience of going through this when it was involved in China. And so the very first thing that we did was went to a work from home situation. So anybody that could work from home was working from home. And then in our workspace, in our operations, we've gone to obviously social distancing for the people that need to report in, but also we really ramped up the hygiene and the sanitation. So cleaning hard surfaces, doing those kind of things where the virus might get onto. And we've amped up the amount of temperature checking we do as people come into work. So we actually do temperature monitoring for both employees and contractors as they come in, because it's one of the easiest and simplest ways for us to detect if anybody's at risk of having the virus. If somebody gets it, and we have had a few cases, if somebody gets it, obviously they go home, they get medical attention, they quarantine. We are still running. Literally everything that we have in the world is still operating. And I hope, knock on wood, that we'll be able to continue to do that right through. The demand for some of our products is quite high. But some incremental things and some what I would call nice to do things, we've timed out just because we don't want to put too many people into harm's way. So certain maintenance activities and other things that don't have a hard timeline on them have actually been pushed out into the future.
Okay, great, thank you. So Tom, a question for you. Can you share some of your thoughts on what the top objectives at Berry are right now? And additionally, some of what you think should be the top objectives for the plastics industry?
Yeah, I think we addressed it up front and clearly having the ability to keep our people safe, number one, and then continue to provide seamless supply and delivery to our customers. That's clearly, the primary objectives for our company right now. Is what people are interested in. I will tell you, during this time right now, the amount of communication between all facets of the supply chain have been really amazing, whether it's our raw material suppliers, them demonstrating, their agility and flexibility, our teams demonstrating ability and agility, or our end customers. And it has been inspiring to see how that's actually operated. And as Jim said, I think it's, we're trying to learn from these different experiences. We began with the virus as well in China just about 3 months ago, where we had deployed a new asset that was completely converted to 100%, production of nothing but material for the N95 masks. And so we've been in this fight for a long time. We're trying to learn from the lessons of the other regions of the world, making certain that we're taking the necessary precautions internally to keep our people safe. But I think we have to continue to operate safely and continue to maintain an uninterrupted supply chain across the stream. And that's the areas of focus for us.
Okay, great. So for Jim, from a macro perspective, we're seeing rapid and unprecedented change as economies around the world effectively shut down. At the same time, China is starting to reemerge and open back up. How are you seeing this situation unfold in the near term, and what impacts do you see for the year?
Yeah, we've seen some good economic indicators coming out of China, as Tom mentioned. China really started into this in the middle to the end of January, around the Chinese New Year time, and obviously was slow to come back out of that. So they followed on that holiday as a containment period. Toward the end of March, we were starting to see production of power for industry is back at like 80%. It had bottomed out at probably about 60%. At the peak of the COVID crisis. You'll still see in the service sector things like people going to the cinemas, people going out retail and shopping. Those numbers are still relatively low, and I think will stay low for a while. But you're starting to see traffic pick up in the biggest cities in China as a sign that people are getting back to work. And so I think what you can expect to see is typically it takes 2 to 3 weeks in this containment phase while the number of cases that get diagnosed ramps up. It takes another couple of weeks before you see the number of hospitalization cases kind of peak. And then probably 2 to 3 weeks after that until you see the number of mortality or death cases start to peak out. So China, 45 to 60 days through this, is starting to come out of it. And I would say, I think we're going to go through a phase here where you've got kind of a return to work from this virtual environment. Then I would say the next phase after that will be hopefully some kind of a return to normal. And then the phase after that will probably be some kind of return to growth. My sense is by mid-year, we're returning to work. By the third quarter, hopefully, fourth quarter, we're starting to return to normal. But my guess is returning to growth is probably something that'll be more of a 2021 timeframe. A lot of industries are still strong. Obviously, the need for healthcare materials, food, basic household items, those things are still strong. The automotive sector is very slow. I think durable goods in a lot of areas is going to be slow, and it's going to take a lot of time for that to pick up after we get back to work.
Okay, Tom, on the same kind of note here. So you talked in your presentation about how COVID is changing the plastics industry. How do you foresee this changing the way we do business going forward, and what impact do you think this is going to have specifically on plastics packaging and the packaging sector?
Well, I think this is it's a great opportunity for us to tastefully re-educate the world around the power of plastics, and not doing it in an opportunistic way, but as a way that's thoughtful, that actually reminds people of why plastics has become such an indispensable part of everyone's life. So education is going to play a huge role. I think the other piece is what we noted relative to collaboration. Collaboration is it doesn't have to be a result of an emergency or crisis. And what I'm seeing between our supply partners, our customers, the federal government has been amazing. I mean, just last week, I received a phone call from the White House. They were looking, because we're a diverse manufacturer, how can we ultimately support the production of certain injection molded parts with our tool and die capability to support, ventilator manufacturing. Other ideas and thoughts on ultimately how we, decouple the supply chain relative to N95 masks, respirators, disinfectant wipes, surgical drapes, surgical gowns. So if we take from one thing, we realize we can operate remotely and effectively, that we can handle any crisis. But let's take a look at this now and say, how do we use this opportunity to continue to innovate and grow our industry space? There's often the time during, periods where you're defending yourself, you kind of stay status quo. We can't do that. The team that's assembled, during this video conference right now are the people in their hands from a conversion, chemistry, material science perspective that can change the world and take it to the next step. And we've got to use this as an opportunity to stay motivated, to stay engaged around what is going to be our thumbprint on this industry going forward and how we positively impact the world. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Good, thank you. So back to Jim. So Jim, along with the COVID situation, we've also seen global oil prices plummeting, and it's prompting some analysts to question if North America still has a shale gas feedstock cost advantage. So what's your opinion on the viability of North American polyethylene resin projects with lower oil prices? And how is this going to change the chemical industry in North America?
Well, it still does have a shale gas cost advantage. I mean, if you look at the oil to gas ratios today, they're still relatively high. And so I think it has shown that it's pretty resilient. I've said before, I think the current oil prices are not sustainable prices. Obviously, we were headed into a little bit of a geopolitical battle between the Saudis and the Russians in terms of available capacity. At the time, we thought we were maybe 1 to 3 million barrels long oil. But with the COVID crisis and everybody working from home, demand for gasoline and other refined fuels has dropped by about 30–35%. So that's made that number much, much bigger. You won't be able to replace oil at $20 a barrel or $10 a barrel, but when you get into the replacement barrels, they're going to be more in the $50, $55, $60 a barrel range, and that's a sustainable price. So we're going to work through a year where we're going to have geopolitical tensions on top of normal supply-demand tensions because of the COVID situation. And I think as we work through the year, people are going to start to realize that they're going to have to bring capacities down to be able to navigate through all this.
Okay, so let's shift to the topic of sustainability now, which is something that both of you covered in your remarks. We'll start with Tom. Tom, one question that we get a lot at Plastics News is people wondering which technology is going to be best to make plastics a circular material. Is it going to be conventional recycling? Is it going to be chemical recycling? Is it going to be bio-based materials, degradable materials, compostable materials? My guess has always been that processors will make whatever customers are willing to pay for. Who do you think will be the winners? What technologies are you counting on to make plastics a circular material?
Well, I think at this stage, all of them, have the opportunity to play a role. And a lot of them now are in the early stages of development. Obviously, mechanical recycling is out there, but as you heard in terms of our primary objectives with the Alliance to End Plastics Waste, we've got to increase the amount of infrastructure that we have in the business, and we ultimately have to do a better job in terms of collecting and sorting. Chemical recycling, every major chemical or resin manufacturer in the world is entertaining how they're ultimately going to pursue chemical recycling or advanced recycling, as it's being noted. We've entered into some partnerships where we've made commitments on those materials to get our customers just simply comfortable with it. And then in terms of compostable materials, bio-based materials, similarly, they're in different stages of development right now. I think it was astute what you said. You have to come up with a plausible plan that can ultimately be acceptable to the end user, and that ultimately is going to allow them to pass those costs on to the end user. And that's always been the way it's been over the last 30 some odd years. All of our customers that we call on the major brands around the world. None of them are coming to us and saying, we need to get out of plastics. They're all coming to us and saying, How can you help us lightweight? How can you help us design for sustainability? And tell us what you know about these other processes out there, what the current cost is, what the projected cost may be, and how's it going to affect the physical properties, and what am I going to see and feel in my products? So there's a lot of that education going on right now, with the brands that we serve. And I think as we continue to play forward, you're going to see ultimately the opportunity where people get more comfortable on each of the substrates, the cost and the value proposition each one brings. But clearly from a scale perspective, advanced recycling or chemical recycling, holds an amazing amount of promise. And there's many companies, and Jim's included, that are exploring different ways and facets that can ultimately be commercialized effectively. So I think all of them are going to play a role.
Okay, good. So Jim, you mentioned sustainability in your presentation, and you talked about making sure that the momentum that the industry has is not lost. So to that end, both Dow and Barry are members of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which you mentioned. And the Alliance is committed to spend $1.5 billion over the next 5 years to stop the flow of plastic into the environment. The CEO of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation said a few weeks ago that solving ocean plastics pollution is a $150 billion problem, not a $1.5 billion problem. So what's your opinion of that? And if it's true, what's the best mechanism to implement and pay for that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure where Ellen gets the information for the $150 billion problem. I would say the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is trying to solve a different problem than the Alliance is trying to solve. Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one of the foremost associations out there that's looking at how to create a circular economy for plastic. So they're working on things like design for recyclability, design with end of life in mind. They aren't particularly looking at trying to tackle the plastic waste challenge. The reason we put the Alliance to End Plastic Waste together is because it is a waste problem that we're trying to tackle, not a plastics problem. It's been turned into a plastics problem by NGOs who use it as a way to raise money, but also who have a little bit of an anti-fossil fuel mindset behind it. So they've tried to encompass it to be a plastics problem, not a waste problem. As Tom mentioned, we have a lot of avenues that we can pursue to take waste plastic, and so that it doesn't get into a waste stream, but it actually gets captured and recycled. The best example is PET bottles. In places where you have deposit laws and you bring returns back to the stores, PET bottles are recycled at rates of 90–95%. But a lot of other plastics you use are not, and a lot of them go into a waste stream. And once they enter that waste stream, the ability to get them out of there and recycle them is tough because they've been contaminated. That's why chemical recycling may play an answer in some of these harder to recycle materials. You can break them down back into a product that can be made into plastics again, and we have a way to mass balance that. Mechanical recycling is going to continue to be one of the preferred ways because it's low energy cost to be able to do it. And if you can get a clean stream, more and more people are showing that they're willing to buy the recycled materials. But we're also going to have to look at waste to energy. One of the things that waste to energy does is addresses energy needs in emerging economies, but it also reduces the amount of waste that ends up going to landfill. So if you look at Japan, for example, which has one of the most sophisticated recycle systems in the world, they still practice waste to energy, and you can do that in an environmentally effective way. And you still have some material to landfill, but it's maybe 7% of the total landfill volume, as opposed to taking everything like we do in America, everything to landfill and putting it there. So I agree with Tom. This is an all of the above solution. On the infrastructure, what the Alliance is trying to do is showcase solutions that can work, and then work with governments so that that $1.5 billion that we've put into the Alliance can be multiplied by ESG capital, by government programs, and we can replicate those programs all around the world. Here's a business model that works, that makes cash, that's sustainable. Now let's go take that to a country and let's put that in, the top 10 cities in that country to eliminate the waste issue. That's the leverage of the $1.5 billion to tackle the waste issue.
Thanks. That's a very insightful answer. I appreciate it. For Tom Berry is also a signatory to the Ellen MacArthur New Plastics Economy Global Commitment. So Andrew Morlett, CEO of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, recently said that 75% of the solution to the plastics waste problem needs to come from redesigning packaging to be 100% recyclable, compostable, or reusable. But there's still a lot of packages that are difficult or impossible to recycle that brand owners and consumers like for their cost and convenience. So how do you think we solved this problem?
Well, it's continuing to grow. And I want to piggyback on a comment that Jim just made during the last question, and why I think the model from the Alliance is so important right now, and the $1.5 billion, why it means so much. We're focused on how we ultimately can have an actual business model showing how you can monetize the opportunity, meaning how you can make money from recycling, how you can do it effectively in these different regions of the world. And so by having those blueprints, if you will, I'm a big believer when you monetize the problem or the opportunity, you find a way, to ultimately, create success. And I think that's really clearly what the Alliance is focused on relative to the different means and methodologies it's approaching to tackle this waste issue. We are so actively involved right now with our end users. I would say it's the #1 component of the questions that they have. How can you help us design for recyclability? How do you help us design for sustainability? We've recently conducted, webinars where you've had literally hundreds of end users sign on, trying to get greater insight. And, as much as this has been in the front of the news, it's still a evolving subject matter that our end use community continues to want to get more information and education around. That's where we're spending the inordinate amount of our time right now, helping them understand what their options are in terms of lightweighting, which is a core competency of what we do in the conversion and the engineering design business, as well as coming up with different functionality to support recycling going forward. So it is a key component. Every single end user around the world is interested in doing that and understanding more and how they can incorporate that into what they do. Even in some cases, in the absence of the appropriate infrastructure, preparing for when the infrastructure does get built, that it will have the maximum opportunity to ultimately get recycled and reused.
Thanks. So Jim, I'm going to have one more question on chemical recycling technology, and that's, again, is related to the feedstocks. Right now, with feedstock costs so low, can chemical recycling be viable when virgin prices for resin are low, and when there's a possibility of an economic downturn?
Well, I think the reality is that we make plastics out of virgin materials because that is the most economical, cost-effective way to do it. Having said that, people are willing to pay more for recycled materials because they believe they're helping be part of the solution to plastic waste. And so that's driving a different value equation than existed before. I do think we've started to see with some of the chemical recycling technologies that you can get pretty high conversion yield. So if we can push some of those yields up into the 90% range, we can narrow that gap between virgin production and recycled materials. And if you have a way for a brand owner to be able to make a claim for a packaged product, then they're able to take that to the market and pass that on to the consumer. And there'll be a certain amount of consumers that will want to pay for that. I do think you have to look at other technologies. You've got to look at waste to energy as a viable way to treat the waste materials because you're reducing the amount of landfill. And then I also think you've got to look at the alternatives of complicated structures. And so, not to take away from, Tom's business or anybody in the packaging business, but some of the ways that we have made packages have used complicated layered materials to be able to deal with very difficult different kinds of substances, maybe juices, acidic environments, oils, other things that need to be packaged. And with all the catalyst technology that we have today, if we can come back and figure out how to make near homogeneous type products that can be more of a single material that can have the same properties as those multi-layer materials, you can maybe change the value equation where we can make large scale homogeneous products out of new catalysts that can replace very complicated and hard to manufacture sometimes complicated structures for packaging. And so I think that's another element that we have to look at. And from a plastics engineering standpoint, from a research standpoint, going back to catalyst fundamentals and being able to scale that up on a big scale, maybe the biggest and lowest cost solutions that we've got in front of us.
Is that something that Dow is working on now, Jim?
Totally. I would say almost all the work that we do on any kind of packaging development ultimately goes back to catalyst technology, and then we can figure out how to scale that up into a film or a rigid material that we can take out to a converter to address needs of a brand owner so that they can have the ability to not only meet the cost targets, but the performance targets. And that's been the challenge. And what you want to be able to do is have a solution for the brand owner that everybody in the value chain can benefit from. And that's really that's what we're trying to solve. And so if chemical recycling can be part of that, that's great. New catalyst technology can be part of that. New polymer technology can be part of that. That's great. Mechanical recycling, that's great. This is like energy policy. You need an all of the above strategy to be able to tackle this issue.
Okay. So Tom, how are changing consumer and customer preferences and things like plastic bans and legislation impacting business at Berry?
I will say we're fortunate we don't have any large portions of our portfolio that's impacted by the bans. We don't believe that's the best way to ultimately address the problem. You know, the problem is really one of education and design and chemistry. And we clearly believe that by our team going out and working collaboratively with our end users, we have a greater ability to ultimately educate them so that they're specifying the right material in the right design, for the feature benefits that they're looking for their end consumers. And that's what this business has always been around and about. But clearly it's heightened the sense of urgency and awareness amongst all our teams. It is amazing how ingrained sustainability and what we do in plastics has become inside of our company and inside of our industry. Our teams are aware of the carbon footprint understanding, and in terms of solid waste, in terms of water, in terms of emissions, and that's a positive thing. And we continue to then in turn branch that out to our end customers to help educate them. But it's simply heightened our sense of urgency and the industry sense of urgency around education to the end users. The end users are not typically prone to making rash decisions without background education. And we're fortunate enough to call on all of them, the majority of them, that we ultimately can have that kind of influence. So it continues to improve that working collaboration between the two.
Okay. So Jim, you're known internationally as an advocate for diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So what's been the impact of that stance on Dow's business, including your ability to recruit talented people?
Well, look, I think there's a business imperative for inclusion and diversity. And I think the biggest one is it allows you to bring people from different backgrounds together to bring their whole body of thought and ideas into the workplace. And if you're trying to run a company where you need to innovate and come up with the best solutions in the world, you have to have an environment that is open and welcomes people in. If you have an environment that's very homogeneous, everybody looks the same, acts the same, talks the same, you're going to by nature restrict yourself from a lot of different inputs. One of the things that we've seen is that it's allowed us to hire the best and the brightest from all over. And I would say it's a combination of them knowing that they're coming to work in a place where they're valued and where they're genuinely wanted. And then secondly, that they're getting to work on things that are aligned with their purpose. So if you're working on sustainable plastics and a sustainable future, if you're working on clean air, clean water, how can we meet a climate, a carbon neutral climate goal? You have the opportunity to work on those things here. And so by being more open about what we're trying to do, by aligning our objectives to what the world wants us to do, I think that plus inclusion and diversity creates the kind of environment that people want to come and work in.
Okay. So, Tom, a few years ago, Barry started a program that they called Plastics Ambassadors. So a project to train your people to understand sustainability issues and the importance of plastics. Has that program met your expectations, and what do you think that it's achieved?
Yeah, the theme around Plastics Ambassadors was, and it's the opportunity with the group that I'm addressing right now. Take advantage of all of your employees, that they are ultimately in a position to be able to defend and support the valuable contribution that plastics makes to making the world a better place. And similarly, be able to refute with fact and data, some of the negatives that had been put out about plastics. So we created the Plastics Ambassadors, which was, another opportunity to educate the entire employee base, but then also pick a component of that for more advanced training. We've completed classes in University of Michigan and at Cambridge in the UK. We have another class scheduled for this fall where we bring and we expose the individuals to, thinkers that can help support our ability to communicate, debate, better understand the facts, so that, we've got ambassadors literally all around the world to support our industry. And because if we can't support it, in a thoughtful, fact-based way, who are we waiting for to do that on our behalf? And I appeal to everybody on this webinar this morning. You similarly should be in a position to make certain you put yourself from a training and education perspective to defend this industry, because this industry has truly made our lives incredibly more robust than they would have been without these many diversified plastic substrates that we all work with every single day. And I want to make certain that I'm putting the faith and trust in our team, who I'm so incredibly proud of, that should they be presented with an opportunity, people leave that conversation saying, wow, you exposed me to things I didn't know. You share with me a fact-based dialogue that I hadn't been presented before. And it's either caused me to hold my view or perhaps move my view to let me learn more. Because clearly, relative to the environmental footprint from a greenhouse gas perspective, in terms of plastics, solid waste, water, plastics has an incredible story, and we've got to educate the world on that story in what is an incredibly emotional topic. And we get that, but let's train our people so that they feel empowered to do just that.
Both speakers today have really presented an optimistic view for the industry. I know Jim said that there's never been a better time to be in this industry, and you talked about the need for a science-based solutions. How does Dow, how do you help communicate that? You're looking at it and you're saying, I think you're presenting very well, these are the science-based solutions that plastics can offer to solve some of these problems. What's your role? Barry has the Plastics Ambassadors. What's Dow's role in communicating that?
One of the things that I think that we have to do as an industry is have to tie plastics to the carbon situation, to the climate situation. So one of the attacks on plastics is to label plastics as a pollutant so you can ban them. And what that does is that overlooks the fact that all the alternatives to plastics have 4 to 5 times the carbon footprint of plastic materials. So you would be shipping more weight, you would be disposing of higher volumes of materials, dealing with those kind of things. So we have to educate the public to do that. And we're in an environment where you can't expect the public to figure that out on their own. I think we're in an environment where people want to oversimplify things. And if they can be convinced by NGOs that plastics are bad because they're made from fossil fuels and fossil fuels are bad, and that what we ought to do is ban everything, then they'll overlook all the positive benefits, the lightweighting for automobiles, the reduced energy that's used, whether it's internal combustion engine or electric, the insulation efficiency for your lead efficient buildings. 40% of all of the energy in the world is used to heat for HVAC systems in buildings. If you can make a lead efficient building with better insulation materials made out of plastics, then that's valuable. Packaging, the lightweighting of packaging, the safety, the hygiene of packaging, the huge needs for packaging in medical applications that we're seeing right now. What would we do without those materials? There'd be no way to disinfect all the hard surfaces that you'd have to deal with if you weren't dealing with plastics. So I think we all have a role to step up and share those messages. This is an opportune time for us to do it because we have some real things in front of us, some real life examples that we can use. And I think we are stepping up there and using those. But to the Plastics Ambassador program, like we do here, getting that word out through the schools and the universities who are being brainwashed the other way is also an important way to get our message out.
Good, thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll turn things back over to Brian. So my last question is going to go to Tom. So Tom, Barry hires a lot of talented people, just like Dow does. How would you describe the culture that you're trying to foster at Barry, and what qualities make a person successful in your organization?
We want to be a culture that does what it says it's going to do when it says it's going to do it. You know, it's the single biggest way to create organization stability. And, you know, relative to composition of teams, you know, we want people that can be agile. And you're seeing right now, if you're not agile in an environment like this, you're not going to be successful. If you're not willing to accept empowerment as a component of what you do, and if you don't act with action orientation, sense of urgency, and speed, you're not going to be successful in Barry. But what we've surrounded ourselves with are like-minded people who want to be empowered, who know ultimately that our ability to coordinate action effectively or more effectively will generate, you know, more growth for our company. You know, that's what we're building, you know, at Barry right now. And our people are absolutely our single number one best attribute. I could not be more proud of how they've conducted themselves in what is an amazingly uncertain environment right now by focusing on the customer, keeping themselves safe, making certain that they're over communicating during a difficult time, that they're working with their end suppliers so that we continue to keep our people safe and keep the steady flow of high quality materials going to our customers during this difficult time in what has turned out to be life-saving applications. I couldn't be more proud and more impressed of that team. And we're happy to continue to build on that.
Okay, good. So a couple of questions from the audience. I'll just ask one here at the top. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we've experienced effective outsourcing abroad on material supply. Will this crisis, will it change outsourcing strategy in the future? Do either one of you have an opinion on that question?
Can you give some clarity on outsourcing, meaning?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. It's the person asked about outsourcing abroad on material supply. So here's my take on this. I know that people have been looking at supply chains and maybe the complicated nature of the supply chains, and it's created some issues in doing things like producing ventilators and PPE, things like that. So what impact do you think there's going to be on the supply chain of what's been going on here?
Well, you know, clearly this is a global pandemic right now. A lot of companies are trying to make certain that understanding if there's a supply demand dynamic that is going to be left after this crisis. They're looking for now how you ultimately can truly act as a global economy, because there may be circumstances that there's capacity in other regions of the world that could be imported to the US or vice versa to help solve the problem. So I think it's going to increase the reality that we are a global economy, but people are clearly going to want to make certain that they've tightened their supply chain and they've got line of sight, you know, to diversified suppliers that have redundant capability.
Mm-hmm. Jim, do you have an opinion on supply chain?
Yeah, I think, Don, it's highlighted something that was happening, I would say, even before the COVID pandemic, which was there are questions around the sovereignty of medical care. How strong is a country, and how is a country able to respond to a medical situation like the one we've got if 90% of their generic pharmaceuticals are made in China or made in India? So I hear it more in that context right now than I do, for example, in the automotive context. We did see when China got hit, the automotive supply chain got hurt pretty badly because a lot of parts were manufactured in China. So I do think that dialogue is going to continue, but ultimately there will be an economic part of the equation that comes into being. And unless there's a reason for people to shift from the outsourcing model that they have today, economically, that's what drove us to the situation that we're in. So I do think for some critical items, some things that we want to make sure that we can have to protect our own country, things like food safety, like we've been trying to do with energy security, also medical security. Those things will probably continue to be at a high level of discussion after we get through this.
Okay. I'd like to invite each speaker to give some closing remarks now. Why don't we start with Tom?
First, I want to again say thank you. This is it's a tremendous opportunity to address such a large group of people that have had and played and will play such an incredible role in shaping the face of this industry in terms of how it ultimately improves the quality of life for people around the world, whether it's health, food safety, health and wellness, longevity. These materials inside this industry are incredibly well positioned to be a real strong contributor to people's futures going forward. I'm proud of what you've all done up until this point, and I'm even more excited because the capability that's on these lines right now to change effectively, how we view our world, it's in your hands. And I think that collaboration between chemistry, between design and conversion, I think are really the key enablers going forward. So I can't thank you enough. Stay strong, during this crisis. Know that we are ultimately going, and we are playing a role, and we will play a role going forward. And take seriously your responsibility to put your own thumbprint on what you want this industry to be, because it's an industry I'm incredibly proud to be part of and lead within. I'm thrilled to have you, at my side.
Jim?
Don, we used to have a saying in Dow Plastics business that everything that we worked on would fit one of these characteristics: lighter, faster, cleaner, or stronger. I would add more sustainable to that list. And I think if you're focused on doing those 5 things inside the plastics business, whether you're working on plastics the way we know them today, or new composites and new materials that are coming to fruition, you're going to find that there's a unbelievable career and an unlimited amount of opportunities in this industry. I can tell you that Brian, who has a 40-year career in plastics, probably when he started couldn't imagine where we'd be today in terms of some of the applications. I can't imagine where we're going to be 30 years from now. And it's all going to be because we've got great people coming into the industry that want to make it even better.
Thank you. Thank you to both speakers. You did an outstanding job today. I'd like to thank SPE, Pat Fari, and Brian Landis for inviting me to moderate the session. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tom, for that inspiring, informative look at our industry and really how we do, and we must innovate to tackle the challenges that are before us and also to benefit our planet. We truly appreciate all the time that you spent with us today and for all your efforts in preparation. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch. I want to close my comments by emphasizing that I am truly thankful for each SPE member who stepped up, engaged, and acted to make virtual ANTEC a reality. Our leadership for their nimble and decisive ideation, design, and construct of this opportunity. Our staff, who amazingly pulled off the impossible in 2 weeks, organized, coordinated, positioned, implemented this first and virtual ANTEC. Our program committee, led by Dr. Mark Spalding, who organized and delivered 2 unique experiences, the live one that was supposed to be in San Antonio and now the virtual one, for knowledge sharing and content delivery. Our chapters to ensure that every student could attend virtual ANTEC at no cost. Our sponsors and exhibitors who have demonstrated yet again through their support, their continued commitment to SPE. Our speakers who preserved and adjusted their time to participate and enrich both membership and those attendees who are experiencing ANTEC for the first time. And finally, our attendees who are dedicating time to professional growth, knowledge sharing, personal networking safely, and community. From the bottom of my heart, I say thank you. I hope that everyone has an enjoyable, enriching virtual ANTEC. May you stay safe, healthy, and connected to all who are meaningful to you. I now pass the camera to Pat Fari, CEO of SPE, who will introduce you to our next speaker.
Before you sign off, gentlemen, thanks, Tom, Jim, for spending time with us this morning. And a special thanks to your teams who were nimble and incredible in helping us pivot like this. So I appreciate that very much. Thanks. Bye now.